Dean was only 24 years old when he died in a high-speed crash in 1955. His career was very short. It spanned only 3 films. And yet, after his death, his fame continued to grow, and he was elevated to legendary and finally cult status. James Dean left behind a legacy of teenage rebellion for an entire generation. But there are those who believe he left behind even more, a curse on the car he died in. In 1950, he made his first screen appearance, earning $30 for this TV commercial. That's Dean on the right, an early and, in retrospect, unlikely member of the Pepsi generation.
Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, a big bottle and it's got bounce, bounce, bounce.
5 years later, he was a Hollywood phenomenon, although most of his fame came posthumously. At the time of his death, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, his 2 biggest films, hadn't even been released. This is Dean's best-known scene, the chicken race from Rebel Without a Cause. But what's far lesser known is that off-screen, Dean was serious about racing. The mid-50s was Southern California's golden age of sports car racing, and Dean and his Porsche Speedster were well on their way to becoming fixtures in it. He started with a bang, winning the very first race he entered in Palm Springs. This is never-before-seen footage of Dean racing in May of 1955. It was just his second race, yet he finished 3rd against a pack of more experienced drivers. Then Dean wanted to step up in class. He was infatuated with the Porsche Spyder, the most sought-after new sports car in America.
The Porsche Spyder was developed specifically for racing by the factory in Germany. 5 Spyders were sent over to Johnny von Neumann's in California, and James Dean got the last Spyder.
The car excited him because the car was really going to be a race car for him. A sports racing car was narrowed it down for one thing, that was competition.
Dean's love affair with speed and racing fit in perfectly with his real-life persona. He sought out danger and loved to walk the edge, a brilliant but troubled young man possessed by demons only he could see. He was fascinated, some say obsessed, with death and the macabre. He liked to tell people he slept in a coffin and cultivated a relationship with TV's first glamorous ghoul, Vampira, who claimed to be a witch and sparked Dean's temporary interest in witchcraft and the occult. He was also photographed in mock hangings. Dean spoke often of death, especially his own, and said he had premonitions of it. But of all the eerie and ironic twists surrounding Dean's death, one stands out above all the rest. A public service television spot he made for the National Safety Council less than 2 weeks before he died.
Jimmy, we probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
It's a good point. I used to fly around quite a bit, you know, took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways, I'm extra cautious. No one knows what they're doing. Half the time you don't know what this guy's going to do with that one.
Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. Life, you might say, might be mine.
13 days later, Dean and mechanic Walt Wuthrich were driving the Spyder to Salinas, California for a race Dean had entered. Still trying to break the car in, Dean kept it at high speed. But as they approached an intersection with another highway, a car coming in the other direction made a left turn directly in front of the Spyder. Wuthrich was thrown from the car and, despite sustaining major injuries, survived. But Dean was mangled in the wreckage and died within minutes. After his death, a number of eerie mysteries and odd occurrences took place, centered around the wreckage of his car. The Spyder had a rear engine, and while the body was smashed beyond repair, the engine and combined transmission and rear axle unit, known as the transaxle, were intact and were purchased by Dr. William Eskrich, a racing enthusiast. Dr. Eskrich installed the engine in his Lotus and loaned some parts to a racing friend, Dr. Troy McHenry. 13 months later, McHenry was killed while racing when his car slammed into a tree. In a separate accident in the same race, Dr. Eskrich was severely injured. Both cars still contained the parts salvaged from Dean's wreckage. It was the beginning of what came to be known as the curse of the James Dean car. The crumpled body of the car went on to a strange afterlife itself, once it was purchased by Hollywood car customizer George Barris, who took it on tour for the National Safety Council.
The trail of events started when, after the car was delivered to our plant by the yard that was storing it, it slipped off the dollies and fell on one of the attendant's legs and broke his legs. Then I started touring the car. It gets to Fresno, and we had the car stored in a building, get ready for the show, and the building burns out.
Later, when the car was being transported to, ironically, Salinas, the truck carrying it skidded. The driver was thrown out and crushed to death when Dean's car rolled off the flatbed. Things got even eerier after that when the car body itself disappeared.
After touring, we sent it to Florida to another one of the safety campaign. It was then loaded onto a truck that was to be brought back to California. Of course, 8 days later, when the truck arrived, there was no car on the truck. We were very surprised and amazed. The pink slip was still there, the copy of the title.
I don't believe that the car was chopped up for souvenirs. In all of my interviews and my writing over the years, I have never talked with anybody that has said that they have a piece of the car as a souvenir. I believe that the car is intact, and I believe that it's in hiding.
Because of the occurrences and the curse on this car by people getting hurt from being associated, touching it, whatever, has made this probably one of the most wanted cars in the history of automobiles.
To this day, the whereabouts of the car body is still a mystery. And did the alleged curse disappear with it? Well, we may have an answer soon, because the transaxle from Dean's car is still floating around 35 years later, with a trail extending from Hollywood all the way to Boston. Jack Stiles collects and races vintage cars and has a passion for Porsches. Tracing the original factory stamped serial number of the transaxle led us to Stiles, who's installed it in a Spider he's restoring and plans to race. He's not exactly worried about the Dean curse, but he is aware of it.
I'm looking at it mechanically. I just consider it another portion and just another piece of metal, and I don't think it has a curse on it. At the same token, I suppose I would go to more of a degree to make sure everything's correct on it. And hopefully in a short while it will be together and running. And then we'll see what happens with this curse.
Jack Stiles hopes to begin racing his Porsche Spider with the Dean transaxle in it in October.